Mr. DeJoy, thank you for being with us today. What is the cost of a first-class postage stamp?
55 cents.
Just wanted to check. What about to mail a postcard?
I don't know, ma'am.
You don't know the cost to mail a postcard?
I don't.
What if I want to mail you said 55 cents for a first class stamp, but what if it's like one of those greeting cards that's a square envelope? Then what is the postage?
I'll submit that I know very little about a postage stamp.
And what is the weight limit? You are more in the shipping logistics business. What's the weight limit for priority mail?
70 pounds.
And what is the starting rate for U.S. Post Office, USPS priority mail?
The starting rate for what?
USPS priority mail.
Starting weight, 14 ounces.
No, the rate, the price.
I don't know. I don't know.
Do you know about, within a million or so, can you tell me how many people voted by mail in the last presidential election?
No, I cannot.
To the nearest 10 million? Is that a no, Mr. DeJoy?
I would be guessing, and I don't want to guess.
Okay, so Mr. DeJoy, I'm concerned. I'm glad you know the price of a stamp, but I'm concerned about your understanding of this agency. And I'm particularly concerned about it because you started taking very decisive action when you became Postmaster General. You started directing the unplugging and destroying of machines, changing of employee procedures, and locking of collection boxes. As a professor, I've always told my students that one of the most important rules in life is to read the instructions. Did you actually read and independently analyze the major overhaul plans before you ordered them to take effect?
Again, I will repeat that I did not order major overhaul plans. The items you identify were not directed by me. I did, and we don't need much analysis to run your trucks to a schedule.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Joy, could you please tell me who did order these changes if U.S. Postmaster General did not? Because these changes have resulted in, and you have said yourself in this hearing.
The Postal Service has been around for 250 years. There are plans. There are many, many executives, almost 30,000 executives within the organization. And there are plans that existed prior to my arrival that were implemented.
Mr. DeJoy, if you did not order these actions to be taken, please tell the committee the name of who did.
I do not know.
Mr. DeJoy, did you analyze these plans before they went into effect? U.S. Postmaster General supervised whomever did apparently.
As I've stated numerous times, the plans were in effect and being implemented before I arrived.
But Mr. DeJoy, do you take responsibility for these changes?
I take responsibility from the day I sat in a seat for any service deterioration that has occurred. You're asking about operational changes that go on throughout the whole organization around the country.
When you're coming in to testify in front of Congress, it's a given that you should probably be well prepared. But when Katie Porter makes it explicitly clear that you should know what you're talking about, that's when there's zero excuse. And yet still, Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General of the United States, sat in front of Congress without any knowledge of the bare minimum stats or costs of the 650,000 person agency that he's supposed to be overseeing. I would say I was surprised, but I'm not at all surprised. Here we find out that Louis DeJoy doesn't even know the simple postage costs at the Postal Service. He doesn't even know what it costs to put a single stamp on a postcard. That cost, by the way, is 35 cents, which I suppose makes me qualified to run the agency. In fact, at this point, simply promising not to destroy their own equipment is probably enough of a qualification to have someone run the USPS. Katie Porter then tries to find out about the changes that have resulted in massive delays at the post office, to which DeJoy evades responsibility and claims that it wasn't him. And when Porter asks who did implement those changes, well then suddenly DeJoy doesn't know who did that either. Yep, nothing like that unparalleled private sector experience where a brilliant logistics CEO comes in and saves a flailing government agency by having zero clue who's implementing changes that have resulted in the complete breakdown of the sole function that the post office is supposed to perform. And look, the point of this video is not to just embarrass Louis DeJoy, although he does a fine job of that on his own. The point is to show that this guy is not qualified to serve in his position, and especially not at a time when the Postal Service is set to deliver an unprecedented number of mail-in ballots ahead of a presidential election. And yet, for Trump and Republicans, that is the point. The point is not to have someone in this role who's actually adept at ensuring the Postal Service will be able to function. The point is to have someone who will help ensure that the Postal Service will break down. Because Trump's own goal, his stated goal, is to ensure that USPS won't be able to deliver the deluge of mail-in ballots by Election Day.
They want $25 billion for the post office because the post office is going to have to go to town to get these ridiculous ballots in. You know, there's nothing wrong with getting out and voting. You get out and vote. They voted during World War I and World War II, and they should have voter ID because the Democrats scammed the system. But two of the items are the post office and the $3.5 billion for mail-in voting. Now, if we don't make a deal, that means they don't get the money. That means they can't have universal mail-in voting. They just can't have it.
I'm not sure who taught Trump how to commit his crimes, but they probably should have remembered to tell him not to admit to those crimes on national television. With DeJoy's obstruction obvious, what needs to happen is that the Senate needs to take up the bipartisan bill just passed by the House that would give $25 billion in funding to USPS, along with the guardrails ensuring that the funding would be used to restore overtime to USPS workers, to prohibit the removal of mail sorting machines and mailboxes, and to require all election mail be treated as first-class mail. If the person charged with overseeing the agency won't do it, then we have to make sure that legislation is passed instead. So if you have a Republican senator, flood their offices with calls demanding that they bring up this bill for a vote. Do it for the seniors and vets who rely on the Postal Service for their medications. Do it for the farmers who rely on the Postal Service for livestock and feed. Do it for everyone who relies on the Postal Service to pay bills and receive Social Security checks. And do it for every American who wants to ensure that his or her vote is counted in the next election. Because despite Trump's best efforts, this is still a democracy and we deserve to have a say. While you're here, please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I take a deeper dive into the week's biggest stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Kamala Harris, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Nancy Pelosi, Cory Booker, Eric Swalwell, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.